I have filed 112 treaty witness reports in my 31 years with the Dorvani Archive. I have catalogued the instruments of civilizations that signed their accords in blood, drawn by ceremonial blade, in bioluminescent ink secreted from glands behind the ear. In molecular etched seal impressions pressed into chromatic alloy plates my instruments could read to 4 decimal places. I have logged weapons caches surrendered as good faith gestures before the first word was spoken. I have recorded the exact mass, material composition, and legal provenance of every object placed on every treaty table in my career. I was not prepared for the pen. My name is HFY. I hold the rank of Senior Chronicle Witness, 3rd Tier, Dorvani Archive Expeditionary Division. On the 14th day of the 4th cycle, Standard Reckoning, I took my station at the north end of the Accord Hall aboard Neutral Ground Station Thesavar Crossing, 2 meters from the treaty table, in the full midday light pouring through the high south-facing glass panels in 4 long white columns across the floor. My instruments were calibrated. My record thread was fresh. I was, as I have always been, prepared for anything. The human delegation entered from the East Passage, 3 of them. Delegate Primary Ilara Mawson, a woman of perhaps 60 years in a dark gray jacket with a small silver pin on the lapel. 2 advisors behind her, carrying nothing, no cases. No sealed canisters, no ceremonial arms. My instruments swept the table the moment they were seated and returned the following: 1 ceramic water vessel, 2 glasses, 1 folded document of processed wood pulp paper, and 1 handheld writing instrument, pressurized ink stylus type, non-ceremonial, mass 41.3 grams, barrel material, molded polymer composite, clip material, pressed aluminum alloy, ink cartridge, brass-jacketed polymer tube, ink, water-soluble pigment suspension, color, blue, cartridge remaining fill, 3.1 centimeters. I ran the instrument classification query while the compact's senior delegates were still arranging themselves on the opposite side. The query returned. No classification found. I ran it again. No classification found. I narrowed the search to pressurized writing instruments. 14 entries returned, all ceremonial, all constructed from precious or semi-precious materials, all measuring a minimum of 22 centimeters in length, all presented in sealed archival cases, all used exclusively by heads of sovereign state or their formally designated proxies. The human pen was 11 centimeters long. It had a hairline crack in the polymer clip, 3.1 centimeters of blue ink. I noted this in my preliminary log, flagged the classification gap, and kept my instruments running. The session opened with the standard preliminary declarations. Archive Master Vel Charan of the Rethavi Procedural Compact read the terms aloud from a certified molecular record document in his own species tradition. Delegate Mawson listened with her hands folded on the table in front of her, the pen lying uncapped to her right. I scanned it twice more during the reading. The ink column did not change, 3.1 centimeters. When Charan finished and indicated the document was ready for ratification, Mawson reached for the pen. My instruments tracked her hand automatically. 41.3 grams. Grip, right hand, index and middle finger along the barrel, thumb as lower brace. She signed her name in 1 continuous motion across the ratification line, dated it below. Set the pen down, capped it with a click. My audio instruments logged as 0.4 seconds in duration, and returned it to her left breast pocket. Post-signing instrument scan. Ink remaining, 2.8 centimeters. She had used 0.3 centimeters of ink to ratify humanity's entry into the Galactic Compact. I held my instruments on the pen through the remaining 3 minutes of the session closing formalities. When the delegations rose to exit, I recorded the pen's final position: breast pocket, clip facing out, cap secured, under the field marked Disposition of Ratification Instrument Post-Signing. That field had previously only ever contained entries such as Return to Archival Case, Sealed in Treaty Vault, Escorted to Delegation's Ceremonial Transport, Destroyed in Ratification Fire per Indigenous Custom. I wrote, Return to breast pocket of signing delegate. It took me 11 minutes to write the instrument classification entry, because the Dorvani Archive has a mandatory 3-tiered classification protocol for every object appearing on a treaty table, and I had to create a new classification branch to accommodate the pen. In 411 years of compact treaty history, the Archive has processed ratification instruments from 67 member species, 112 accession signings, 17 border resolutions, 44 resource agreements, 29 formal truces with accompanying arms documentation. Every instrument in every proceeding had a classification. Every single one. The Rethavi use chromatic seal plates. The Veshkai use blood-pressed clay tablets requiring 2 witnesses and an open flame. The Osurans submit digital molecular encoded signatures on sealed drives that must be physically destroyed after the copy is verified. The Theran use a wax press on a document that takes 4 hours to cool. I called the classification desk and reported the gap. The clerk asked me to repeat the instrument specifications. I did. A long pause. She asked if it had been presented in an archival case. Breast pocket, I told her. Another pause. She asked if it carried ceremonial designation under the delegation's sovereign protocols. I had already queried the full human instrument registry. No ceremonial designation for any handheld writing implement existed anywhere in their submitted documentation. She told me to hold. 6 minutes later, a senior classification officer came on and asked me to describe the instrument from the beginning. I described it. He asked, what did they use it for? To sign the ratification document. Is it a weapon? No. A ceremonial object? Apparently not. A sovereign designated instrument of state? Not by any designation I can locate. He was quiet for long enough that I checked my line connection. Then he said, what is it then? A personal writing instrument the delegate brought in her pocket, I said. Standard issue pressurized ink stylus. The type used for everyday notation. He said nothing for a long time. Then, file it under instrument, undesignated. Provenance, human delegation. I will escalate for formal classification review. I told him I preferred to complete the entry accurately. He said that was my prerogative, but that I should note the classification gap clearly for the review board. I told him I intended to. The classification I finally filed reads, Primary Instrument of Civilizational Record, Provenance, Human Delegation, Accord Session Thesavar Crossing, Cycle 4, Day 14. Material, Polymer Composite, Brass-Jacketed Cartridge. Mass, 41.3 grams. Ink, Water-Soluble Blue Pigment Suspension. Ink column at session open, 3.1 centimeters. Ink column at session close, 2.8 centimeters. Ink consumed during ratification, 0.3 centimeters. Instrument disposition, breast pocket. Instrument condition, functional. Status, sufficient. I submitted the report, closed my instruments, and sat for a moment in the Accord Hall after the support staff had cleared the table. The light was still coming through the south panels, long and white and flat across the empty floor. I have never once used the word sufficient in an instrument status field across 112 reports. It is not a classification, not a material designation or a provenance code or a legal standing notation. It is not a word the Dorvani Archive's instrument protocol uses anywhere in its 400-year taxonomy. I used it because it was the only accurate word I had. 67 species in 400 years, and not one of them had arrived at a galactic ratification table with a writing instrument that could run out of ink. Not one had needed to. The Veshkai bring blades for the blood press. The Theran bring heated wax stamps. The Osuran bring sealed drives the size of a fist. Every instrument in the archive's taxonomy was built to be permanent, sealed, ceremonial, unrepeatable. The human brought a pen she had been using to take notes on the transport. I know this because I found, in the final instrument scan, the faint lateral impression of a word pressed through the barrel, the ghost of notation from an earlier page, readable under enhanced resolution imaging as what appeared to be a single common word in the delegate's language. My instruments rendered it in transliterated script. The word was questions. She had spent the flight writing down questions, and then, when the time came, she signed with the same pen. When Archive Master Koran read my preliminary summary at the following morning's debrief, he stopped at the instrument classification entry and read it twice. Then he looked up and asked, in the flat procedural tone he uses when genuinely uncertain, did she know what she was signing? I told him, I believe she knew exactly what she was signing. He looked at the entry again. Status, sufficient. He closed the document and moved on to the next item. I did not say anything further, but I noted his question in my personal log, which is not an archive document and which no review board will ever read, alongside the only answer I have been able to settle on in the years since. She brought what she needed. It held.